1 year later, half of Republican voters say rioters were protecting democracy. 7 in 10 say Biden's win by 7 million plus votes was a fraud. Joining me now with their reporting and their insight, Catherine Lucy of The Wall Street Journal, Jonathan Martin of The New York Times, The Washington Post, Paul Kane, and CNN's Eva McKen. And Catherine, I want to start with you because, it was just last month that President Biden said, I don't think about the former president. He very rarely speaks about the former president, certainly never says his name. Now, privately, I think you and I are both keenly aware he thinks about the former president a lot. But this shift in messaging, this shift in going straight at the former president, what was the rationale behind it?
You're so right, Phil. This was a real turning point in the way he talked about the president publicly. He really has spent the past year trying to move away from talking about him, trying to focus on unity when he could, saying he wanted to work with Republicans. And, as I understand it, and I'm sure your reporting shows too, that the White House really felt that they couldn't make this speech. He couldn't stand in the Capitol and talk about these events and really not directly address President Trump, former President Trump, and his role. And so they really felt they had to take him on squarely. And I think it's important not just that he talked about Trump, but the way he talked about Trump, that he really used very strong language. He talked about his bruised ego, as you just saw. He talked about him being defeated. He talked about him using words that he must know would infuriate the former president. And we saw with the responses that we saw from former President Trump, he was frustrated. So it was both taking on this fight and the way he took it on very directly in very stark terms.
Yeah, it was a fight that the president clearly wanted to pick after spending more than a year very clearly not wanting that fight. Jen Psaki, when she was asked about the former president's statements, embraced the fight as well. J-Mart, I think it's the reality, though, right? It's kind of the disconnect of what President Biden wants to be, where he wants the country to go, and the reality that his presidency is still defined by what happened on January 6th and his predecessor.
Trumpism is not over. In fact, Alex Burns and I are finishing a book right now that's called This Will Not Pass. Trumpism has not passed. The polarization, the sort of larger polarization that is shaping the country's politics, shaping the country really at large, has not passed. Over a year after an election, you have chants of "Let's Go Brandon" at sporting events across the country. Politics is still seeping into everyday life here in a way that it would not have 10, 20 years ago. I think that's the reality Biden is facing. The campaign has not ended. We're in a permanent campaign. January 6th was not the culmination. It was one more way station, sadly, on the way south in this country's polarized politics. And Biden is simply recognizing that, and he is finally listening to the sort of advice of his party and trying to take it to Trump and trying to create a contrast, trying to present himself as an alternative to Trump and Trumpism, rather than simply somebody who is out there gamely, if not terribly successfully, trying to heal the country.
And Eva, I think one of the best windows into kind of why this moment has presented itself for the president, but also where the Republican Party is not the Matt Gaetzes or the Marjorie Taylor Greenes that you see all the time. It's somebody that you covered quite closely in your last job, and that's Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Take a listen to what he had to say about, I think during the impeachment trial, about President Trump's role here.
President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
Look at the statement that he put out on Thursday. He says, quote, "The United States Capitol, the seat of the first branch of our federal government, was stormed by criminals who brutalized police officers and used force to try and stop Congress from doing his job." But he goes on to accuse Democrats of using the anniversary to push through a voting rights agenda that doesn't have anything to do with January 6th, saying, quote, "Senators should not be trying to exploit the anniversary to damage the Senate in a different way from within." The broader point being that McConnell made very clear his feelings on Trump, doesn't really talk about Trump anymore, but doesn't talk about it generally anymore, which I think underscores better than anything else where the party ended up going in the wake of January 6th.
Yeah, Phil, listen, the Republican leader knows what he has to do to maintain power. And he quickly understood that after those initial comments were made, that he saw no political benefit to continue making similar comments. He wants to remain leader. His number one priority is taking back the Senate. For Republicans to take back the majority, and he doesn't see the political benefit of continuing to hammer Trump. He has indicated, for instance, that he thinks that the outcome of the January 6th investigation will be interesting, but I think that that's as far as he is going to go on this issue, because he wants to remain leader, and he cannot needle the Trump base and keep his caucus in line.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued when he slips in that he's very interested in what the January 6th panel is up to. PK, if you want to understand where the party is, you look at their voters, you look at their constituents. That's what so many members, even those who don't like former President Trump, always tell me when I ask them kind of where they are on things. One thing that struck me, there was a focus group on January 6th. It was in the New York Times, Republican voters talking about kind of where they are, and I think this underscores why GOP leaders where they are, including one, Barney, a Delaware Republican, says, so it's not Pearl Harbor, it's not 9/11, it's January 6, 2021, and it's just another day, every day. If you live in Washington, turn on the news, you hear January 6 100 times a day. If you go out to Oklahoma, you don't hear it. Gail, a Florida Republican. People don't talk about it. The issues that we're dealing with right now, it's COVID and inflation, the supply chain issues. So January 6 never really gets discussed. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. And I think there is a dissonance here. I've got good friends and family members who were sending me text messages on January 6 trying to see if I was okay in the Capitol, who now think it wasn't a big deal or was kind of invented. Why does that exist?
It's, a 20 to 25 year media technology revolution, echo chamber, where people live inside silos and just start hearing one side of the coin, that hear from the people that they want to hear from. I think that creates a lot of it. I think the broader public, at least the public that are tuning in to these shows and on Twitter are really just viewing it, not even through an ideological idea. It's just like sports. I cheer for the Phillies and the Eagles and the Philadelphia team, so therefore I will, cheer for them regardless. That's sort of where we have gone to a lot of politics right now. Looking forward to, the fall and the midterm elections, I think most Democrats, their strategists and top advisors do realize that January 6th is going to be a motivating issue for their base, for their activists, to get them to the polls, but they don't think it's going to be a critical battleground issue in a lot of those seats that they need to win and to hold to keep their majorities in the House and Senate. I do think that most of your voters are going to be looking at the pandemic, schools, jobs, and the economy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll get to that in a couple blocks. PK, it's interesting you would acknowledge rooting for the Eagles after last night. Catherine, I want to close with you. Look, one of the interesting things, again, you talk to Republicans and they'll say quietly or privately that they don't agree with former President Trump, or they certainly don't agree with the January 6th stuff or the election lies. But it's so clear the downside to humoring him and letting him kind of go. Take a look at this quote from the Washington Post on November 9th. It says, what is the downside for humoring him for this little bit of time? No one seriously thinks the results will change, said one senior Republican official who sounds like a South Carolina senator. He went golfing this weekend. It's not like he's plotting how to prevent Joe Biden from taking power in January 2020. Flash forward to now, the Washington Post found that Big Lie supporters were running to help oversee elections, at least 163 in state races, 69 for governor, 55 Senate, 18 state secretary of state, 13 state attorney general. You keep passing this off as a fad at your own risk, it seems like, inside the party.
That's right, and that's definitely true. Shortly after the election, a lot of people around Trump were saying, "Don't worry, he understands what's going on. This isn't going to continue. Just let him cool off." And obviously, that's clearly not what has happened. And you're seeing these, Trump-supporting candidates, running for these key offices. Republicans in key states weighing new voting laws, passing new voting laws, and there are a lot of folks who are really concerned about what this means in terms of the 2022 midterms and the 24 presidential race. Could these various efforts, make it, make it harder to trust the process, undermine the electoral process? And I think that's one thing that, for electoral watchers, are really going to be watching very closely, going into these races.
Yeah, there's already such a trust deficit.